Have you ever noticed that whenever somebody starts talking about RPL, there's usually, comments around RPL kits. Do we have an RPL kit for that? Do we need to buy an RPL kit? Actually, one of my personal favourite comments is, we can't offer RPL yet because we don't have the RPL kit. Why? Why? Why are we so convinced that RPL requires a completely separate set of assessment tools? Because if you actually look at the standards, that's not what they say, and they didn't say it in the previous ones either. If you look at standard 1.6, it talks about RPL. It bounces back to standard 1.4, which talks about assessment. Neither of them say, "Thou shalt purchase an RPL kit." Yet, somewhere along the way, we've convinced ourselves that quality RPL requires a giant portfolio or a specialised workbook or 17 different forms of 20 pages each. Enough paperwork to make a mortgage application look simple, right? Now, before anybody jumps into the comments, I'm not saying that every RPL kit is a bad idea. Some resource developers really do produce useful resources. Some RPL kits contain tools that genuinely support assessment. This isn't my point. My point is that the existence of an RPL kit has somehow become confused with the existence of a quality RPL process. And those really aren't the same thing. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. RPL continues to be one of the areas that causes significant issues across the sector. When you look at audit findings, regulatory action, and historical compliance concerns, RPL appears again and again and again and again. Not because assessors forgot about the RPL kit, right? Or they didn't have an RPL kit. It's because competency wasn't properly established. Evidence wasn't sufficient. Currency wasn't demonstrated. Assessment conditions weren't addressed. Or assessment decisions simply weren't supported by the evidence that had been gathered. In other words, the problem wasn't the paperwork. The problem was the assessment. And I think that's where a lot of RTOs get stuck. We've become so focused on the paperwork and the forms that we've forgotten what RPL actually is. RPL is assessment. That's it. That's the whole thing. RPL is assessment. It's not administration. It's not a document collection exercise. It's not a process of counting years of experience, because Lord knows the sector loves to be given a number. It's assessment. The learner is still being assessed against the same unit. The same performance criteria apply. The same performance evidence applies. The same knowledge evidence applies. The same assessment conditions apply. The same competency decision applies. The only thing that changes is the pathway used to gather evidence. And once you understand that, you start looking at your existing assessment system differently. Because suddenly you realise that your regular assessments, can absolutely be applied to RPL assessment. Assessment activities don't suddenly stop working because the learners applied for RPL. So, why do so many RTOs feel like they need a completely separate assessment system? Now, I think part of the answer is that RPL kits have become normal. We've seen them for so long that many people assume they're required. They're not. What's required is evidence. What's required is assessment. What's required is a defensible assessment decision. And that's very different. Let's think of a simple example. Imagine you've got a learner who completed a superseded qualification a few years ago. Most RTOs, maybe not most, many RTOs immediately start talking about gap training. Gap training! It's another phrase that drives me nuts. It gets thrown around constantly in RPL conversations. There is no such thing as gap training within RPL. RPL is an assessment pathway. Training is training. Different things. Now, what you might identify through RPL mapping is an evidence gap, and that's completely normal. You might discover that you need additional workplace evidence. You might need a professional discussion or a workplace observation. You might need evidence that demonstrates currency. Those are evidence gaps. They're not necessarily learning gaps. And this is where good assessors make their money. Good assessors don't start by asking, what form do I need? They start by asking, what evidence do I need in order to determine competency? That single question changes everything. It changes how you approach mapping, how you approach workplace conversations, third-party reports, professional discussions, and most importantly, it changes how you approach the assessment decision itself. Because the goal of RPL isn't to collect paperwork. The goal of RPL is to determine whether somebody is competent. And that's what standards 1.4 and 1.6 are actually asking us to do. Now, if this is a topic you've struggled with, or if you're currently reviewing your RPL processes and trying to work out whether they're actually fit for purpose, I've recently released a new resource that walks through an entire RPL process from start to finish. Rather than focusing on forms and templates and do's and don'ts, it focuses on the principles of quality RPL practice. It includes a detailed case study that follows a learner through their RPL journey, provides examples of evidence collection, mapping, workplace observations, professional discussions, third-party reports, and a comprehensive guide that explains the assessment principles sitting behind each stage of the process. And most importantly, it shows how RPL can be conducted using an organisation's existing assessment system rather than relying on a qualification-specific RPL kit. You'll find a link to the resource in the description below. And on top of this, I'd genuinely be interested to hear your thoughts. Has the sector become too reliant on RPL kits? Do you think they've actually helped to improve RPL practice? Or do you think they've sometimes distracted us from the thing that actually matters? The assessment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.